You're listening to Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories.
So this happened back in 2000 when I was 15 years old, and smartphones and regular mobile phones were scarce. It was a Friday night, and the sky was as clear as I could remember, and the full moon was shining in the sky, and the saying that, if the full moon is out, the crazies come out, was playing in my mind as I looked up. I was doing my usual Friday night routine, which involved being out with a group of my friends at the local park, about 1.5 miles from my parents' house. This park was located next to a densely wooded area, and going through this wooded area would be my most direct route home, as it had a footpath that went straight through the middle of it. It was starting to get late, and a few of my friends had already left, and it wasn't long until I decided that it was time for me to leave too, so I headed home. I would normally take the footpath directly through the woods, and it had lighting at the entrance and exit, but nothing throughout it, so it was pretty dark. For some reason, I felt uneasy about walking through the woods that night, so I decided to take the long route around the woods. To be fair, that wasn't unnormal for me. I would occasionally take the long route in fear of something being in the darkness on the path. As I walked through the empty streets, I noticed they seemed very quiet, eerily quiet, in fact. I continued to walk until I reached an alleyway on my left, which was a cut-through to another street, and I looked up the alleyway as I walked past, and that's where I saw him, a large, dark-hooded figure at the other end. I could barely see his face, but I knew he was staring directly at me. I could feel his eyes burning right through me, and I started to get a horrible feeling. My stomach was knotting, so I continued walking at a faster pace. Once I got past the alleyway's entrance, and he was out of sight, I heard a sound that horrified me. The sound of running echoing down that alley, and it was getting louder as he got closer. This intimidating figure had decided to give me chase, and I wasn't going to wait around and let him catch me. I sprinted towards the woods as they were close by, and if I was unable to outrun this person, at least I could do my best to lose them in the darkness of the woods. As I entered the woods, it was pitch black. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, and I was thinking maybe I could hide, although I was too scared to stop until I had some distance between me and this guy. I knew these woods very well, as I've lived in this area my entire life, and I would walk my dog here daily. So even in the darkness, I had some clue as to where I was going. After a bit, I realized I couldn't run anymore, and I decided my best hope of escape was to climb up a large tree. I don't think I ever climbed a tree so fast while trying to remain quiet, and I remember looking down and seeing the tree branches below in the darkness, and I was listening for these footsteps. I heard him. He had slowed his pace, likely as he could no longer hear mine, as I was now up in this tree. The sounds of his steps drew closer and closer, and I started to feel physically sick. My stomach had knotted shut, and I was practically eating my heart as if it felt like it was coming up out of my throat. As I sat there frozen in fear, the footsteps started to get further away, until all I could hear was silence and the odd rustle of trees from the wind blowing. A massive sigh of relief came over me. And now I was wondering, how long until I can make a break for it? I must have sat up there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and I was making myself go crazy just sitting and waiting. Surely he was gone and the coast was clear. So I headed down the tree slowly and quietly. And once I reached the bottom, I looked around to check my surroundings. After a few seconds, I got an idea of where I was and started to slowly walk through the woods, making as little noise as possible. I decided to get my door keys out of my pocket and turn them into a makeshift knuckle duster in case this person crept up on me. While walking, I was on high alert listening to every single little sound, and I wanted to make sure if someone was close by, I knew about it. All I kept thinking was this person was hiding in the darkness, stalking me, and I was his prey. I've never felt so uneasy, and it was like all the trees had eyes, and they were looking right at me. It wasn't long until I reached the end of the woods, and home was almost within reach, and I decided I wasn't taking any risks, and I was going to make a break for it and sprint the rest of the way home. It was only about 300 meters from the entrance of the woods to my front door. As I was running, literally just from around the corner from my house, I took a look over my shoulder, and by the entrance of the woods, there he was, to my horror. He was still in pursuit, running from the entrance of the woods and in my direction, but luckily for me, he was a distance away, and I was almost at my doorstep. I got around the corner, and now I was at my front door, my brain overloaded with thoughts of classic horror scenes of people dropping their keys or failing to find the right key. Thankfully, I didn't make that mistake, and my keys were still in my hand. I opened my door, burst into my house, being cautious. I closed the door quickly and quietly behind me, trying to make as little noise as possible. No one was home, and I did not want this person to know where I lived, so I proceeded to run up the stairs and into my bedroom, which overlooked the street. And there, I saw him coming from around the corner, and he ran straight past my house, clearly looking as still in straight pursuit, chasing me down. I was overcome with relief. Not only did I manage to narrowly escape from this deranged individual and whatever his intentions were if he caught me, thankfully, he didn't see where I lived. After I talked to some friends, I realized that those who lived on my street and others who lived close by had had multiple issues with this person, although he never went after us as a group. This probably isn't too terrifying to hear about. However, at the time, I wanted to be anywhere else but there. As a reference for later, I'm a male and I'm about 5'8", both now and back when this story took place. So about 5 years ago when I was 18, I was working in a supermarket in the UK. I always worked Friday nights till 10 p.m., and then despite it being the law to have at least an 11-hour gap between shifts, I was back in at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. I lived nearby, and I had started driving about 6 months prior to this story. I used to smoke weed a lot back then. I currently still do, but probably only once every 2 months. There was a guy who I was friends with that I used to buy off of all the time. I'll call him Josh for the sake of the story. Every Friday, I'd finish work, get home, have a joint, and fulfill the inevitable munchies, and then get some sleep, ready for my early start the next morning. I realized at about 8:30 p.m. during my shift that I didn't have any weed at home, so I dropped Josh a message, and just the standard, "Hey man, what do you got?" or something to that effect. He replied pretty sharpish, notifying me that he doesn't, but he could get some from his supplier no problem. However, there was a condition. Josh was having a sesh in a friend's field with some other friends in a nearby village, and therefore requested to be picked up so he could restock, sort me, and then be taken home. I thought about it for a moment, and then I realized I could easily be home for 11 p.m. after all of that, still allowing me to have a smoke and a bite to eat. I replied to Josh, telling him that there was no problem, and that I would finish at 10, and I'd probably be with him in about 15 minutes. Josh then replied, stating that he'll wait next to a wooded area on the side of the road to be picked up. Woods, huh? Might have been cause for some alarm bells, but it would inhibit my night's plans if I didn't go. Yep, no worries, I said, continuing to stack the shelves for the remainder of my shift. 10 p.m. comes around, and I text Josh to tell him I'm on the way. He texts back with "safe," and I begin driving. Despite this village being rather local, I'd never driven through it before. So once I got there, I called him, and I remember this conversation as if it happened yesterday because of how pissy I got. Josh spoke like a level 3 certified roadman, so I'll translate where I feel it's appropriate. Alright, dude. I'm in the village. Where you at? I asked. Safe, brother. Your man doesn't know shit, innit? He basically didn't know. Mandem's gonna shot you to Jake, and he'll bless you. To be fair, I didn't even think that made any sense at the time, but I caught the gist of what he was trying to say. Luckily, me and Jake knew each other, and he spoke normally. Alright, mate, it's Jake. Have you gone past the pub yet? He asked. I'm actually parked there now, man, I said. Cool. Just keep driving the direction you came, and you'll eventually see us on the side of the road. I'm not coming along. Josh is a bit too blazed to know how to get to the road. Haha. So, with that, I continued driving and eventually found them. Josh got in, Jake said his goodbyes, I U-turned and drove back to familiar territory. We got to where he told me to go, and I just asked, "Is this your supplier's place?" Josh replied by saying no, it wasn't, and we're picking him up from here. I was getting annoyed again because I didn't agree to this, but I did want to smoke. I was going to need one after all of this, and Josh went into the house and was there for about 15 minutes. Yeah, I could have just driven off and left it, but I now realized I was in a questionable situation when Josh came back with a guy that was easily almost 7 feet tall. He was built like Arnie in Predator, and his whole aura just screamed drug dealer. This is Jeff, the guy I was on about. We need to get to his place to get the stuff. Jeff? That name didn't fit his appearance, but I realized that given the situation. This guy walked around to my driver's side window, which was open. Towering over my car, he extended his fist for a fist bump. I bumped it, and he said, "Pop the boot, G." I told him it doesn't pop. You manually open it at the boot. Wait a minute, why? He somewhat aggressively answers with, "Why the fuck do you think, bruv?" He looks up at the house he just emerged from and shouted, "Yo, put that shit in the boot!" As Josh gets into the car next to me, I see through the passenger window 2 guys emerging with 2 backpacks each. Josh, what the fuck are they doing? Restocking, man. Well, me and Jeff both are, but I'm only interested in the weed, he answered in an assuming tone. What do you mean? What else is in the bags? Can't we just get what we need and go? I was getting twitchy at this point. Haha, better question is, what hasn't he got? He's a dealer, man. Weed, coke, MDMA, ketamine, acid, crack, morphine. Some heavy shit, bruv. My heart fell out of my arse. Before I could say anything, Jeff was in the back seat, almost taking up the whole space with his mass. The boot was closed, and the 2 mystery guys were just stepping back into the house. I sat there, hands on the wheel, constantly swallowing and starting to shake. "Fucking go! Drive!" Jeff shouted, and smacked the headrest of the driver's seat. I slowly pulled out and made the journey to his place, through tense directions supplied by the supplier himself. Jeff lit a cigarette in the back, so I stopped and asked him to put it out. I tried to be stern, but he just looked at me in the mirror and rolled the window down instead, saying nothing. I carried on, hearing some suspicious noises coming from the back, but I was more worried about not concentrating and seeing a police car drive past or something. We finally got there, and he told me to pull into this alleyway that leads to the back of the houses. So I pulled in, and Jeff told me to drive with my headlights off as to not draw any attention. Jeff got out of the car and proceeded to make a phone call. I turned to Josh and simply said, "I don't like this, man." To which he said, "It's chill. I don't think we have anything to worry about." For some reason, I then put my car in gear, which made Jeff, who now stood in front of my car, look up with fury in his eyes. He pretty much curb-stomped the front of my car, which made me stall and shunt forward. Jeff, now not worried about drawing attention to us, walked over to my window yelling, "Get out of the fucking car! Get the fuck out now!" I froze and looked at Josh, who just said, "Mate, we need to get out." All while Jeff was still screaming, "Get the fuck out now! I won't ask you again because you won't be in a state to hear it. I am not fucking around." He punched my wing mirror and it folded in. I jumped, turned the ignition off, and whipped my keys out, jumping out of the car quicker than I've ever moved before. Jeff pushed me back and I fell into some bins that were running along the alley, and by this point he pulled out a small blade and pointed it down at me. "Leave your keys and go with that fuckhead," he was pointing to Josh, "to the road and wait." By this point I had tears in the back of my eyes. I didn't want to leave my keys. but I heard the fear in Josh's voice as he said, "Yo, just give him the keys, man." I stood up, handed over my keys, and hastily backed away to the alley entrance. It was 12:30 in the morning at this point. I was tired, stressed, scared, and feeling sick. While standing at the road, I noticed a road sign that said the alleyway wasn't a through road, so I knew that he at least couldn't take my car. About 20 minutes passed, and Jeff reemerges, bladeless and with my keys in his hand. He hands them back and simply says, "Safe, G," and holds his other hand out, balled up in a fist. I couldn't speak. I just simply fist bumped him again and took my keys back. Josh then pipes in with, "We good, bro?" "You're far from good, mate. Get the fuck inside the house." Jeff then turns to me and says, "I'll see you around." I nodded, walked past him back to my car, and got in. Jeff walks past and asks with a normal, carefree tone, "Yo, you got any gum?" I again nodded, trying to hold back tears. I handed him a pack of gum, and he smiled and walked into his house behind Josh. I sat in there in silence for about 5 minutes, breathing heavily, finally letting my tears flow. I reversed out of the alley, turning my lights on as I got to the road, and went home, weedless. I got home, and the first thing I did was check my car inside and out. The backpacks were gone, and there was a fucking baggie on my back seat. Those suspicious noises I mentioned must have been Jeff snorting coke while we were in travel. What a fuck night. It was now about 10 after 1 by the time I got into bed, and I didn't sleep a wink. I still went straight to work that morning. Josh contacted me later that day, asking if I still wanted some, and that he'd compensate me for what had happened. I accepted and went to see him at his house after work, and he gave me some extra smoke for nothing. Turns out he was super behind on payments by at least £1,000, and he took a few punches once he got into Jeff's, as well as spending a few hours helping him bag up all of the product ready for distribution. Josh ended up repaying his debt and swiftly got out of the game not long after. I see him from time to time, and he's doing a lot better. Jeff, on the other hand, I never saw him again, and I plan to keep it that way.